Welcome back to Echoes of Ihsan. This time, we're taking a deep dive into a really fascinating work, Imam al-Ghazali's Marvels of the Heart,
Oh, this is one of my
as
favorite.
part of his revival of the religious sciences, right?
Yeah, the Ihya Ulum al-Dib.
And it's all about, well, the heart,
hmm
but not just the heart as a physical organ.
Right, right. It goes so much deeper than that.
We're talking about the heart as like the center of our being.
Exactly. The seat of our knowledge, our perception, the potential we have for spiritual growth.
So to start off, could you maybe tell us a bit about how al-Ghazali distinguishes between like the physical heart and what he calls the spiritual heart?
Yeah, so he really emphasizes right from the beginning that when he's talking about the heart, he's not just talking about that muscle that pumps blood.
Right, the one we all share with animals.
Exactly. Every animal has that. But for al-Ghazali, the spiritual heart, that's something special.
So what is the spiritual heart then?
Well, he describes it as a subtle kind of essence, immaterial, and it's connected to the physical heart,
Okay.
but not in a way that we can really grasp, like physically.
So not anatomically.
No, no, not at all. He uses all these different analogies to try and like illustrate the relationship.
What kinds of analogies?
He talks about like accidents and substances or qualities of things,
Okay.
the relationship between, say, a tool and the person who's using it, or a place and someone who occupies that place. It's like that.
So you're saying we can't really understand this connection in our like normal way of thinking about things?
Yeah, it's really hard to wrap your mind around it, but that's part of the point.
I'm starting to see why this is a deep dive.
Right, it's depth stuff. But al-Ghazali wants us to understand that this spiritual heart, it's immaterial, it's immortal, it's the true essence of a human being.
It's like the core of who we are.
Exactly, and that's where, he says, true knowledge, real understanding, that's where it resides.
I see. So we've got this concept of the spiritual heart, which is already pretty complex, but then al-Ghazali uses these four terms to describe it, right?
Right, right. Qalb, ruh, nafs, and aql. Heart, spirit, soul, and intellect.
And what's really interesting is he says each of these words actually has two meanings.
Yes. And he's really specific about this. He's not just using them as synonyms.
Okay, so what's he doing then?
Well, the second meaning of all four of these words, they all refer to the same thing, that subtle spiritual substance, the core of our being that we've been talking about.
So the spiritual heart.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's try and break these terms down a little bit. Qalb, the heart. Well, we kind of already know what the physical heart is.
Right, but that second meaning, it goes beyond just the physical organ. It's pointing to, like, the knowing essence of a person.
The part of us that can, what, perceive truth.
Yes. And connect with the divine, with God.
Interesting. Okay, so how about ruh? That's usually translated as spirit.
It is. And in one sense, it does refer to that, like, refined substance, the one that's, produced in the heart. And it carries the life force throughout the body.
Right, that's what distinguishes a living body from a dead one.
Exactly. But al-Ghazali's second meaning for ruh, just like with Qalb, it's also about that immaterial essence of the human being.
So there's like the physical aspect of the spirit, the life force.
Right.
But also that deeper spiritual aspect that connects to who we are.
That's exactly it.
Okay, that makes sense.
And what about nafs? Soul. Now that seems like it could be a tricky one because we often think about it in terms of our desires.
Yeah, and even sometimes our negative tendencies, right? It can be kind of a loaded word.
Yeah.
But al-Ghazali, he's not ignoring that aspect of it.
So he's including things like anger and appetite.
He is.
Yeah.
But he's saying that even those, potentially negative forces, they're ultimately rooted in that same spiritual essence.
So even our desires, our anger, those are part of our true self. Yes. He's emphasizing that our true self, our core being, has this potential for both good and bad.
Okay, so he's not saying we need to deny those aspects of ourselves.
No, not at all. It's more about understanding where they come from and learning how to, manage them.
To guide them in a way that leads us towards the good.
Exactly.
Okay, and then we have aql, intellect.
Right, aql. So on the surface, it refers to, our ability to reason, to acquire knowledge.
Or a thinking faculty.
Right. It's what allows us to analyze things, understand the world.
But al-Ghazali's doing his double meaning thing again here, right?
He is. Because he's ultimately pointing us back to that same subtle spiritual substance, that knowing essence of the human being.
So it's like he's using all four of these terms with their double meanings to really drive home this idea that our true essence is this multifaceted spiritual reality. Connected to but distinct from our physical bodies.
Yes, exactly. And he sees the spiritual heart, this essence, as the site of this constant interplay of forces. He uses this really interesting analogy to describe it.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about this. He talks about armies.
Right. The armies of the heart.
Tell me more about that. What are these armies?
He talks about both internal armies and external armies. And the internal armies, those are the forces at play within our own heart.
Like our desires?
Yes, exactly. Our desires, our knowledge, our senses even, they all make up different parts of this internal army.
So it's like there's this constant battle going on inside each of us between like different desires, motivations.
That's a great way to put it. It's this dynamic interplay of forces. And al-Ghazali is very specific about which parts of this army, which forces, can be helpful or harmful.
Okay, so give me an example.
He talks a lot about anger and appetite, for example.
Well, those are pretty powerful forces.
They are. And they can easily lead us astray, pull us away from our true purpose.
Hinder our spiritual growth.
Exactly. But al-Ghazali also says that anger and appetite, they can be beneficial if they're guided by the heart.
So like righteous anger.
Yes. Anger at injustice, or a healthy appetite for knowledge. Those can be powerful motivators for good.
They can actually propel us forward on our spiritual journey.
Exactly. But to keep those forces in check, al-Ghazali says we need another part of that internal army.
Okay, so what is that?
Knowledge, wisdom, and reflection.
So those are the forces that can kind of rein in the anger and appetite.
Right. They help us to understand the world, make good choices, resist temptations.
It's like having a wise counselor inside of us.
I love that. A wise counselor guiding our choices, helping us to align with our higher purpose.
Exactly.
But it doesn't stop there. The internal army, it also includes the five senses.
Oh, interesting. You mean like sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell?
Those are the external senses. But al-Ghazali also talks about the internal senses.
Oh, right. Those. What are those exactly?
They're a bit more subtle. They're like the processes that interpret the information we receive from the external senses.
So, like, not just seeing a tree, but actually understanding what a tree is.
Yes. And he actually describes 5 specific internal senses. Things like common sense, imagination, reflection, recollection, even memory.
Wow, so it's a whole complex system.
It is. And all of this, the senses, the knowledge, even the anger and appetite, all of this makes up that internal army of the heart.
Okay, so we've got the internal army all figured out. Now, what about these external armies you mentioned?
The external armies, that's basically our physical bodies.
Our limbs, organs, all that stuff.
Exactly. Al-Ghazali sees the body as the instrument of the internal armies.
Okay, I think I'm following. So, like, our hands can build things, our legs can carry us places, but they're ultimately tools guided by what's going on inside the heart.
You got it. It's the internal forces, the desires and intentions of the heart that ultimately drive our actions.
So the external armies are important,
Of course,
but they're subservient to the commands of the internal armies.
that's the idea. It's all about the heart.
Wow, this is really making me think about all the choices I make and how they might be reflecting what's going on in my own heart.
And that's exactly the kind of reflection al-Ghazali wants us to do. He wants us to be aware of these internal forces and how they shape our lives. And what's so amazing is al-Ghazali doesn't just stop at, describing these armies. He actually connects it to the nature of knowledge itself.
Knowledge, how so?
He's saying that for humans, true knowledge, it can't just be about memorizing facts or having information in your head.
You have to impact the heart.
Exactly. True knowledge, it should bring us closer to God, to the divine. It should change how we act, how we see the world.
It's transformative.
Yes. And this is where he highlights what makes the human heart so unique, so special compared to animal.
Oh, that's right. Earlier you mentioned that the human heart has, like, special properties when it comes to knowledge.
Exactly. He's very clear that unlike animals, we humans, we can actually attain knowledge that goes beyond the physical world.
We're not limited to just our senses.
Right. We can understand things that we can't see, hear, touch, taste, or smell.
Yeah.
He actually outlines 3 categories of knowledge that are unique to humans.
Okay, let's hear them.
So the first one is axioms and universals.
Axioms and universals, what are those?
Think of them like the fundamental truths that we just inherently understand,
Yeah.
like built-in rules of reality.
Like what?
Well, for example, we all know that something can't be in 2 places at once,
Yeah.
right?
This makes sense.
Or that something can't be both created and eternal. These are things that we don't necessarily learn through experience. They seem to be like part of how we think.
It's like they're just there, these basic principles of existence.
Exactly. And then there's acquired knowledge. This
Yeah.
is what we gain through study, observation,
So
experimentation.
stuff we have to actually work for.
Yeah, it's the realm of science, philosophy, history, all those disciplines.
So with acquired knowledge, our internal army is out there exploring, expanding its understanding.
I like that. Yeah, it's an active pursuit of knowledge.
And then we have, was it inspired knowledge?
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting.
Tell me more.
Inspired knowledge. It's direct from the divine.
Directly from God.
Yes. It goes beyond our senses, beyond our intellect even. Think of it like a gift of understanding, an insight that transcends our limited human perspective.
This sounds almost mystical.
It is, in a way. Al-Ghazali describes it as knowledge that comes as though flung into the heart from an unknown source.
Wow, flung into the heart. That's quite an image.
Right. And he even talks about different types of inspiration. There's like general inspiration, which he calls ilham in Arabic. That's the kind that saints and those who have purified their hearts can receive.
Okay.
And then there's prophetic inspiration, way, which is reserved for the prophets, of course.
Right.
And then there's the knowledge that comes through, like deduction and reasoning, which scholars and thinkers arrive at.
So we have this whole spectrum of knowledge.
We do, from those basic truths to those profound insights that come from a direct connection with the divine.
And Al-Ghazali saying our ability to access all of this, especially that inspired knowledge, it depends on the state of our hearts.
Yes. That's why he uses this beautiful analogy of the heart as a mirror.
Yes, the mirror. That's one of his most famous analogies. Remind me, how does that work?
So imagine a heart that's pure, free from all corruption. That heart, he says, is like a perfectly polished mirror. It reflects the true nature of things just as they are.
It can see clearly.
Exactly. But a heart that's clouded, by negative qualities, by sins, by worldly attachments.
That heart's like a tarnished mirror.
Yes. It can't reflect clearly. Its perception is distorted.
So it's not just about acquiring knowledge, it's about being able to actually see it.
That's a great way to put it. And that's why he emphasizes purifying the heart, removing all those things that prevent us from seeing clearly.
It's like polishing that mirror.
Exactly. He actually lists 5 specific obstacles that hinder our ability to attain true knowledge, things that cloud the mirror, so to speak.
5 obstacles. Okay, what are they?
The first one is immaturity. He compares a young person's heart to a piece of metal that hasn't been polished yet.
It needs time to, develop its reflective capacity.
Right. And just like a mirror can get dusty, our hearts can get tarnished by sin. That's the second obstacle.
Sins create a barrier between the heart and true knowledge.
They do. It's like they create this film over the mirror. The third obstacle is a lack of seeking. If we're not actively seeking knowledge, if we're not curious, our hearts won't be receptive to it.
So we have to put in the effort.
We do. We can't just sit back and expect it to come to us. And then there's blind acceptance. That's when we cling to beliefs without really understanding them.
We just accept what we've been told without questioning.
Exactly. We haven't really made those beliefs our own.
Yeah.
And that prevents us from seeing things clearly. And finally, there's a lack of direction. If we don't know where to look for truth, our hearts will wander aimlessly.
It's like being lost with no compass.
Perfect analogy. So he's giving us this roadmap, identifying these obstacles, these things that prevent us from seeing clearly.
And urging us to work on removing them.
Yes. To polish that mirror, so to speak.
Wow, I'm really starting to see how all of this connects. It's not just about learning facts. It's about transforming our whole being.
That's exactly it. It's about aligning ourselves with truth, with the divine.
So how do we actually do that? I mean, how do we purify our hearts and make them those clear, reflective mirrors?
Well, that's where the 2 doors come in.
2 doors.
Yeah, the 2 doors to the heart.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So think of the outer door as the door of the senses. It's how we perceive the physical world.
The world of form and matter.
Exactly. It's through our senses that we observe, experiment, gain knowledge about the world around us.
So it's like the outer door connects us to that tangible reality.
Right. And then there's the inner door. This one's a bit more mysterious. This is the door of divine inspiration, intuition, revelation.
So this is where we access knowledge that goes beyond the physical.
Yes. It's the source of knowledge that comes directly from a higher realm. Remember how al-Ghazali talked about knowledge being flung into the heart? That's what he's talking about here. It's like the inner door suddenly swings open and this flood of understanding pours in.
It's a direct connection with the divine.
Exactly. And so al-Ghazali says we need both of these doors, the outer and the inner, to access the full spectrum of knowledge.
The outer door for knowledge of the world and the inner door for knowledge of the divine.
That's it. And this leads us to two paths to knowledge that he outlines, the Sufi way and the way of the theologians.
Ah, yes. This is where al-Ghazali's own background comes in.
Right, he was both a Sufi mystic and a scholar of Islamic theology.
So he was familiar with both of these paths.
He was. The Sufi way, as he describes it, it emphasizes purifying the heart, removing those blameworthy traits we talked about, and turning towards God with complete sincerity.
It's about creating that inner receptivity.
Yes, so that the inner door can open and that divine knowledge can flow in.
So for the Sufis, it's all about that direct connection with God, that experience of inspired knowledge.
Exactly. They see purifying the heart as the key to unlocking those spiritual treasures. And then there's the way of the theologians, which focuses more on the intellect.
So studying scripture's logical reasoning.
Yes, they prioritize the outer door, so to speak. They don't deny the validity of the Sufi path, but they see it as more difficult, less reliable.
They think knowledge can be attained through study and reason.
Exactly. But what's so remarkable about al-Ghazali is that he acknowledges the value of both approaches.
He's not saying one is better than the other.
No. He seems to be suggesting that there are multiple ways to access knowledge and truth, and each path has its own strengths and challenges.
I think that's a really valuable lesson, especially today. We live in a world that often prioritizes the rational, the scientific.
Right. But al-Ghazali reminds us that there's another dimension of knowing, a deeper, more intuitive way of perceiving truth.
And that's accessible through purifying the heart.
Exactly.
It's really interesting how he presents these two paths, the Sufi way and the way of the theologians. And they do seem, kind of different,
Yeah, they do. Almost at odds with each other sometimes.
but he sees value in both.
He does. It's almost like he's saying that both the outer door and the inner door, they're ultimately leading to the same place, a deeper understanding of ourselves, the world, and the divine.
So it's not about choosing one over the other.
Right. It's more about recognizing that there are multiple ways to approach knowledge, and each path has its own, unique contributions.
And what's so cool is that he doesn't just leave it at that. He actually gives us practical advice on how to, actually purify our hearts.
He does. He's not just talking about theory. He's giving us tools and practices that we can use to really transform ourselves.
So it's not just about thinking about these ideas, it's about actually experiencing them.
Exactly. And one of the most important practices he emphasizes is the remembrance of God, or dhikr.
Dhikr. I've heard of that, but I'm not really sure what it is.
So basically, it involves repeating certain phrases or names of God,
Okay.
often combined with focus breathing and really being aware of God's presence.
So it's about cultivating this state of constant remembrance, keeping God in mind throughout the day.
That's the idea. And al-Ghazali, he describes dhikr as a powerful antidote to all the distractions and negativity that we're constantly bombarded with.
That's like a shield for the heart.
Yeah. It protects us from spiritual forgetfulness, worldly temptations, all that stuff.
So we're not just protecting ourselves, we're actually nourishing the heart, strengthening our connection with God.
Exactly. It opens us up to a deeper experience of God's love and mercy.
It's amazing how something so simple, like repeating God's name, can have such a profound effect.
It really is. It speaks to the power of intention, of really focusing our awareness. And it reminds us that even small, consistent practices can be transformative.
So alongside dhikr, he also talks about the importance of seeking knowledge, right?
He does. And he's very specific about the type of knowledge he's talking about. It's not just about accumulating facts. It's about seeking knowledge that illuminates the heart, that deepens our understanding of God and the world around us.
Knowledge that transforms us.
Yes. And remember, we talked about those different types of knowledge, the intellectual versus the knowledge of the heart.
Right.
Well, he sees those as complementary. He acknowledges the importance of intellectual knowledge, the stuff we gain through study, reason, observation.
But it's not enough on its own.
It's not. True knowledge, he says, it has to penetrate the heart. It has to transform us from within.
So we need both, the light of the intellect and the warmth of the heart.
Beautiful way to put it. And he encourages us to seek knowledge from all sorts of sources. The Quran, the teachings of the Prophet, spiritual masters, even the natural world, our own experiences.
Knowledge is everywhere.
It is. If we approach it with an open heart, with a sincere desire to learn, and this pursuit of knowledge, it's not passive. It requires effort, discipline, a willingness to challenge ourselves, to step outside our comfort zones.
We have to be active participants.
Yes, and it's not just about acquiring knowledge for ourselves either. Al-Ghazali emphasizes the importance of putting that knowledge into action.
Of actually living it.
Exactly. He says knowledge without action is like a tree without fruit. It might look nice, but it's ultimately barren.
So knowledge is a gift to be shared, to be used to benefit others.
Yes, he encourages us to use our knowledge to serve God, to help others, to make the world a more just and compassionate place.
So it can be a powerful tool for personal transformation, but also for societal change.
Exactly. And this journey of knowledge and transformation, it's lifelong. There's no finish line.
We're always learning, always growing.
Always. And he reminds us that even small steps in the right direction, they can have a huge impact. Even just fleeting moments of insight, those can be incredibly powerful.
So even if we stumble, even if we fall short, as long as we keep striving, keep turning back to God, we're on the right path.
That's the spirit. And he also reminds us that the path itself, it's beautiful. It's filled with moments of joy, wonder, deep connection.
So we should enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. Savor those moments of grace. And so as we wrap up this deep dive into al-Ghazali's marvels of the heart,
What's the takeaway?
I think he's inviting us to explore the marvels of our own hearts, to look within, to cultivate those qualities of knowledge, wisdom, love that are already there.
To embark on our own unique journeys of self-discovery.
Yes, guided by his wisdom and by our own yearning for connection with the divine.
It's been an amazing journey exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise. May these insights inspire us all to cultivate the marvels of our own hearts and contribute to a more beautiful and compassionate world.